If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. What is the one absolutely terrifying paranormal encounter you've had that made you believe? I actually had a very strange experience at my friend's house. Where I was sitting in my friend's basement, I noticed like 3 or 4 tall black creatures standing in the corner near his amps and drum set. I don't remember if they had red eyes, I just remember the noise they made when they opened their mouth, because it sounded like rain. Which is why I called them rain people. My friend saw them also, and one friend thought he should turn the light off to see what they would do. They just stood there. I turned the light back on and looked back, and they were gone. A little later I went upstairs to go to the bathroom, and after I saw them standing across the street midday, I went back to the basement to hang out with my friends. For context, I was 9 years old at the time, and I didn't talk very much. So my mom finally got her first house in 2004. It had 5 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a basement with a washer and dryer. The backyard was my favorite part of the house, though. Now, to help you understand, I'd have to tell you the layout of our home. We had a flight of stairs that led to the first floor, which had 2 bedrooms and the bathroom. Then you walk up 3 steps into the kitchen/living room areas. Next, a flight of stairs that lead to the second floor and the first room on the second floor. A small left turn up 3 small stairs, then my room and my mother's room next to the bathroom. And a small closet that held our bedsheets and towels. The second flight of stairs in the living room is where I first saw her one rainy night. I wanted to get some water from the kitchen, but I didn't want to wake my sister, who was asleep in the living room, so I didn't turn the light on. Something caught my attention from the staircase, though. At first I thought it was my mom coming to see who was in the kitchen, but then I noticed she didn't seem to be moving. That's when I realized this person was actually staring at me, but not in a normal way. In a way that seemed like she was staring into me or through me. She had peeling gray skin with holes where her eyes should have been and a gaping black hole where her mouth would have been that was lined with a plethora of razor-sharp teeth. I froze and ran to my sister's room. I pulled the covers over my head and closed my eyes real tight till they hurt. That's when I heard the screaming. They were like 1,000 animals, all dying at once in the most gruesome ways you can think of. It was loud and heinous, it sounded like something out of hell. And it was terrifying. I didn't know what to do except cover my ears in hopes that it'd stop soon. The walls shook, and it felt like the house was being lifted from its foundation. Unfortunately, it didn't stop there. This screaming echoed throughout the house, causing my body to tremble with fear. I thought eventually it would stop or at least calm down. Unfortunately, it didn't. This went on for months until our house burned down. I saw her walk out the front door as the fire was being put out. She wasn't screaming this time, instead, she was smiling. About a year ago, last summer, one of the scariest things to ever happen to me occurred. I've encountered some very strange and paranormal things before, but nothing physiologically affected me quite like this. I was watching TV in my dad's basement at night, about 10 minutes past 3, or something like that, like I often do, when I experienced what I could only describe as being close to the feeling of a severe panic attack. I have generalized anxiety and have had many panic attacks before, but this was different and noticeably more intense. It felt as if a huge weight had come over me, and I was paralyzed with fear. I wanted to run upstairs, but I physically could not get myself to move, I was that scared. All I knew was that something was seriously wrong, so I began crying profusely and screaming for someone to come downstairs to help me. This was completely random and had never happened before. My dad lives in a new, lovely townhome with a finished basement. While I was still experiencing this terrifying feeling, I received a text message from my best friend. He had no idea that any of this was happening. His text was asking me why I was in the middle of a cemetery at 3-something in the morning. I asked him what the hell he was talking about, and he sent me a screenshot of my location from the app Find My Friends. There it was, a pin of my location, placing me right in the middle of a cemetery about 10 miles away from my home. Since that night, I have not had anything like this happen to me. I haven't felt the same paralyzing sense of fear, nor has my location shown that I was at a random cemetery. I still don't have an explanation for this, but the mere thought of it frightens me to no end. I am a 14-year-old female, and because of my age, the only job I can get in my state is babysitting. I wanted some of my own money, so I decided to give babysitting a try. For about a week I studied and took a babysitting test just so I knew how to properly care for a child. After taking the test, I posted on my town page that I can babysit. A month or so later, I got a job offer from a family 3 houses away. I accepted the job for a Saturday night from 5 to 10 p.m. to babysit a 5-year-old. That night I headed to the house and got the rundown of the house and about the kid. I was told that the parents were just her godparents because her actual parents died in a car accident when she was 1. But other than that, everything seemed good. Her bedtime was at 7, so until then, we colored, played with Barbies, and watched her favorite show, Bluey. The clock had struck 7. So we went over her routine. Bathroom, brush teeth, and bedtime story. She chose Goodnight Moon to read before bed. So I sat in bed with her, and halfway into the book, she goes, "Someone's on the stairs." Her room is on the 2nd floor, next to the staircase. "No one's there, we're home alone," I told her. But she kept insisting. So I told her I'd check the house, which I did. I checked upstairs and downstairs. But I don't find anything. I go back up the stairs, and she says, "Mommy's behind you." Let's just say after that I have not babysat her again. Okay, so it's about a month from this, and my babysitting jobs have been really slow, and that family requested a job again. I decided to take it. I don't think I will be accepting from them anymore. This happened about 2 hours after I put the kid to sleep. I was downstairs in the living room, and I heard footsteps upstairs. I went to go see why she was out of bed. I stood at the bottom of the stairs for a second and looked up the stairs. The bathroom light was on. So I walk up and I knock, "Everything okay?" No answer. Kid's name, still no answer. I'm coming in. I open the door, and no one's there. So I go into her room because maybe she was walking in there. But no, she was fast asleep. I was obviously creeped out, and then I went back downstairs and got the intense feeling of being watched. Now for sure, I'm not babysitting for them anymore. I grew up in Southwest Virginia, Appalachian born and bred, and multiple times throughout my childhood, teens, and early adulthood I witnessed and unwitnessed experiences with a family member, currently alive, calling out from the woods, on the property, outside the woods, and within the house. This would occur while the family member was out of town, several hours away, or not at home. Never saw anything but did quickly get a very weird / something is very wrong kind of feeling. The most memorable experience was when I was a teenager. My father traveled to see family 2 to 3 hours away, and he wasn't due home until late. It was just getting dark, and my mother, little sister, and I heard my father yelling upstairs from the basement. My dad called me Sissy after my younger sister was born, and he was hollering, "Hey, Sissy," from the basement. We had a vent just over a wood stove in the kitchen, and we frequently communicated through it between the floors. When I approached the vent and peered into the basement, it was pitch black down there. I responded, "Dad? Is that you? Are you struggling to find the light?" No response. It wasn't a hallucination. All 3 of us heard it. The feeling that something was wrong hit me hard. I was afraid to go down there. I looked out the window to see if my dad's truck was in the driveway, but it wasn't. Mom and I both had a horrible feeling. She refused to let me go outside, not that she could have made me go out that door. She locked up the house and sat with a loaded gun until my dad got home. Mom asked him if he came home and left. Maybe we didn't see him, even though he had been gone for hours when that happened. He swore he was at his sister's house 3 hours away at the time it occurred. Nothing was broken into or out of place when he checked it out. Anyone else experience anything like that? I've had a handful of paranormal experiences, but only this one sticks out as truly chilling, and I still have no explanation other than my belief that it was something demonic or an evil spirit at the very least. It was at a friend of my brother's house where my brother had left some of his things and asked if I could pick them up for him since he was currently out of state. Being the loyal brother, I went to get them but decided to bring a few of my friends with me since I had already made plans with them and figured this would only take a second. While we were there, Roy, my brother's friend, kept telling us that there were demons in his house. I dismissed this as him being a little crazy and trying to scare us, but the first strange event occurred when I picked up my brother's belongings. Among my brother's belongings was his old Bible. Curious as to what notes he may have written in it, I opened it up but quickly discovered that every other page in the 1,000-page Bible was stuck together with what looked like pieces of double-sided tape. Although it startled me, I still did not believe it was something supernatural and rationalized that Roy went to this extreme measure to convince us of his story, but what happened next confirmed it. One of my friends, Mike, had to take a call from his then fiancée, now wife. During this time, I saw him come back inside, walk across the room, and enter the hall without looking at us. Since this was a house he was not familiar with, I thought it extremely odd that he didn't say anything or ask where the bathroom was, for example, so I called out to him. No response. It was dark when I left the hall where he had gone. I called out to him again. No response. At this point it felt like the temperature in my blood dropped 10 degrees, and I could have sworn the classic cliché of the door closing behind you was starting to happen. I propped the door with my hand before it closed and promptly went outside to find Mike still on the phone. I asked him if he had just come inside to use the bathroom or something, and he said, "No, dude, I've been talking on the phone. I don't even know where the bathroom is." As he saw the look on my face, he asked, "What's up?" And I simply told him that we needed to leave. I later explained everything to him in the car, at which point he clearly denied that he ever did such a thing and felt very uncomfortable knowing the story. We both agreed to never visit that house again. The mall I work at was built in the 60s, and I have been working there since 2004. I had always joked with my coworkers about our store being haunted and never really took any strange happenings seriously. In 2007, I was offered a job doing security for the mall and took it because it paid as much starting as I made as a manager at the store I worked at. The only drawback? It was a graveyard. During this time the mall was adding skylights, tearing down a Mervyn's, and building a Nordstrom. My first incident was the early morning of Black Friday, a little after 3 a.m. I was driving around the parking lot and happened to see a large man in a security uniform in our office. We have an outside office with a glass door and a code lock. Normally this would not be out of the ordinary, as we have several very cliché security guards. The problem was that the only other person working was a small Cambodian man. I called my other officer over to report what I had seen, and he informed me that in 2005 a guard had died of a heart attack at the mall. He showed me a picture that was posted in the lunchroom, and I was shocked to see the resemblance between him and who I had seen in the office minutes before. My coworker and I laughed about how we had an extra officer for backup and continued our shifts. A few months later, I was delivering something to the mall office when I heard an old man say behind me, "Excuse me, miss?" I turned around and said, "Yeah, what's up?" To find no one there. Now mind you, I was in a locked back hallway, and I ran up and down that hallway searching for the source of this voice and found nothing to explain it. Now most people don't realize how many suicides actually happen at malls, but I know of 3 at my mall. One I found. There used to be a police station on one of the porches. One day, for whatever reason, some African American dude shot himself in the head right next to the substation. While they were tearing down this substation and building new stores, a lot of strange things happened in that area. I saw a black man frantically trying to get housekeeping attention but to no avail. The housekeeper had no idea what I was talking about. A tenant looked in a store window and saw a black man's reflection waving his arms next to her as we were walking. It always happens in the same area of the mall as the suicide. One night, I went to unlock a service door on that very porch. As I approached, I started to smell a mixture of honey buckets and dead animals. When I opened the door, I found that the light had gone out in the hallway, and it was pitch black. Or so I thought. A figure started to come towards me that was even blacker than the hallway, and the smell intensified. I actually ran back to the car, waving my hands in the air and screaming. This one I think was the worst. You know how when you are in a well-lit room and you look out a window at night? All you can see is your reflection, right? Well, we were having a blizzard, and I was working by myself. I decided to go out for a smoke. As I was walking out, I happened to glance at my reflection. There was some sort of animal behind me. A big one that I had never seen before. I looked down and ran my ass outside. Once I gathered myself, I started to think about what I was going to do because there was no way in hell I was going back in that office. I thought, hey, I'll just drive around. Nope, the car keys are on the office desk. Okay, I'll just walk around the mall for a while and hang out with housekeeping. Nope, the mall keys are on the desk. Okay, duck this place. I quit. Ha. Nope, the keys are on the desk. I waited in the snow during a blizzard for 3 hours until the next guard came on duty. Most recent. I saw someone sitting in a massage chair. Then I saw a kiosk chair move without making a sound. This is damn near impossible unless it is lifted off the ground. Later that night I had a nightmare about demon possession. Super scary. Anyway, I hope I didn't ramble on. I'm usually just a lurker. In the summer of 2018, the youth of my church went to a camp called Camp Dakota. It was an activity camp, so they had archery, tomahawk, and things like that. One of the activities they had was also paintball, but the paintball arena looked like a hellhole from the outside. There was a chain link fence, a rope fence, and super thick ivy growing on the inside. It gave creepy vibes to everyone. Later that night, at maybe 11 o'clock, we all got bed in these canvas tents with bunk beds and talked for a little bit. Before we decided to finally try to sleep, someone said, "Hopefully no creatures come out of that hell spot." That's a thought that I wish never was thought. It seemed as though everyone fell asleep immediately, except me. After what felt like 10 minutes of me trying to fall asleep, I heard something rustle the tent door. The zipper unzipped, and I could hear the sound of the zipper pull move around on the zipper. I figured someone was just leaving our tent to go to the bathroom. We were sleeping on bunk beds, and I was on the top, so there was no way that I could see someone that was regular high when they were standing on the ground. But I did see something. It had the shape of a person, super tall, and darker than dark. This thing was almost emitting black. There's no good way to describe it. We had a lamp hanging up, and it was on the dimmed setting, and I couldn't see any detail on the figure. It soaked up all the light that was being emitted from that lamp. It looked a lot like the picture in the video and was described exactly how it looked as well. As the figure stepped in front of the lamp, I could tell it was turning by the way the shoulders were moving. I couldn't figure out which way it was turning, but as soon as it stopped, I had the overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. It sent chills down my spine. This figure had no facial features. It was just a big, tall, but skillful shadow, so there was no way to know if it really was looking towards me. I tried my hardest to not move a single muscle. Maybe this thing would go away. I think I fell asleep before it moved because I don't remember it leaving. I woke up the next morning and remembered that something was weird that night, same as the lady in the story. But nothing could come to my mind. I thought hard, but really nothing came to mind until lunch. When someone else said they saw something. I immediately remembered what happened. I told my friend everything that I could remember, and he said he had the feeling he was being watched that night. The girls, on the other side of camp, also said they heard something from outside their tent. None of the leaders heard it though. They also said that there was screaming the second night we were there, but none of the guys heard that. The last night, all the young men were packing up some of the things we didn't need that night, so we could just get up, do a little packing, and go. We were doing that, and 2 black cats popped in our tent. I love black cats, but these cats just gave an uneasy feeling to the people in the tent. We all have had the opportunity to go back, but no one has taken it. We don't feel comfortable going back. A few people will bring it up as a joke, but most of us prefer it to not be talked about. Just typing this makes me nervous. I hope no one has the opportunity to come in contact with whatever that thing was ever again, but I'm sure it popped up since my experience with it. My parents renovated our 1887 built Irish country estate house in the 1980s and 90s. We always joked with friends about ghosts because they were terrified to go to the bathroom on their own. It had multiple outhouses that the farmhands and animals would have lived in. One night I went to bed and heard my dad, who usually went to bed last, up and down the stairs multiple times, opening and closing the broken kitchen door with a loose, noisy handle. The next morning I went into my brother's room, which I never did, before school to ask him what our dad was at because he kept me up. My brother's face went white as he told me he heard the same thing and that no dad had gone to bed the same time as us and that our dog, who was usually locked into the back porch, had come up to his room 2 times during the night. The second time he had put her back in the room, and she was clearly very scared. As he went to close the door, he heard the other door from across the room open, so he ran back up to bed. We also had my dad's American friends staying with us, and they told us they felt a presence in my brother's room, which was down a creepy dark wing of the house that I used to run by to get to my room. The family who had previously occupied our house emigrated to Australia. The son came to our house for a visit one time and told us where old staircases used to be and such, and also mentioned that my mother died in this room, my brother's room. My mom told us she used to be in the house on her own with just my brother as a baby and never felt anything. Our house felt creepy at times and had all the stereotypical scary old house things, creeping floorboards when the heating came on, rickety window handles and strong wind. The only other time I felt anything else was waking from my sleep with a jolt, feeling like someone was right in front of my face. This was really the only creepy experience we had in the house in my near 25 years there. I will never forget that night and can still hear the old floorboards on the stairs and the loose handle on the kitchen open. I suppose it's hard for me to make this credible, but myself and my brother talk about it all the time and recently told my parents. My dad said the only thing he ever had was sitting in the living room and felt a huge gust of wind come over him. I've dealt with paranormal experiences throughout my life, and I'm convinced that some kind of spirit follows my family from time to time. It usually just shows up as little shadows peeking around corners or strange noises in the middle of the night. No sign of her. At this point, I was really worried. In a last-ditch effort, I grabbed her favorite squeaky toy, a little pig that she adored, and squeezed it. Out of nowhere, she appeared upstairs in the hallway, right in front of my brother's room. I could see her standing there from the main floor. Relief washed over me, but I was also confused as hell. I called out to her, "Come down here. I have your Cheerios and your squeaky pig toy." But instead of coming to me, she started walking back and forth, crying like she was stuck or scared. I was baffled and getting a little scared myself. I kept urging her to come to me, but her crying only grew louder and more desperate. So, I started climbing the stairs, but the higher I went, the louder her cries became. I began to worry that she might be hurt or trapped, so I hurried up the stairs, my heart racing. When I reached the top, I suddenly felt something scratch down my back, 5 distinct fingers. I kid you not, it felt like a hand had just clawed me. I screamed in shock and bolted towards Stephanie, who was still crying in front of my brother's room. My brother heard me screaming and burst out of his room, totally freaked out, asking what was happening. I told him something had scratched me, and then, out of nowhere, we both started hearing this loud banging on the walls. We were completely terrified. Without thinking, I grabbed Stephanie, and my brother and I ran downstairs to the solarium, which had a glass door. We shut it behind us, thinking we'd be safe there. But then the banging started again, this time on the glass door itself. We could see right through it, and there was no one there. It was just us, but the banging was relentless, echoing through the room. We were both sobbing at this point, absolutely terrified. We called our mom, begging her to come home immediately. But she didn't believe us. She thought we were just imagining things or trying to prank her. Later, when things finally calmed down, my brother checked my back. Sure enough, I had 5 scratch marks running down my skin. They weren't deep, but they were definitely there. That was the only time I was ever physically attacked by that spirit. It makes me wonder if another one entered my home that day. The following is a true story. I personally experienced it in 1992 along with multiple witnesses. A close friend of mine asked me if I'd be interested in visiting Edge Hill on the 300th anniversary of the battle there. The Battle of Edge Hill was a pitched battle during the First English Civil War. It was fought near Edge Hill and Kinneton in southern Warwickshire, England, on Sunday, October 23, 1642. A man my friend worked with was very much into the paranormal. He'd told my friend about the anniversary and that he and some friends were planning to go there on the night. I agreed to go, and, on the night, about 6 of us drove over to Edge Hill. We parked as close to the location as possible at a country pub, where we all enjoyed a beer and talked about the battle. To reach the hill, we had to walk along a narrow country lane for about half a mile. The entrance to the hill was over a fence, located in the hedgerow. We each entered the field. It was very dark, with very little moonlight. Ahead of us, we could see the hill as it sloped down to farmland. At the bottom of the hill we could make out another hedgerow, beyond that more fields, and in the distance the lights of the nearest town. We began walking down the hill, talking and joking, not taking things very seriously at all. I didn't expect we'd see anything that night. When we reached the bottom of the hill, we each climbed over a fence and into the next field. This is when things started to get strange. A few minutes later, I noticed a light in the distance. It appeared to be in the next field. I could see the hedgerow at the end of that field silhouetted against the lights from the town. The light was stationary and appeared to be several feet in the air. I pointed out the light to the others, and we all stopped and tried to figure out what we could see. As we watched, a second light suddenly appeared to the left of the first one, at the same height. None of us could make out what we were seeing. As we watched, the lights began to move. The only way I can describe what I saw was that it looked like a person with flashlights on each side of their head, swaying from side to side. We debated what we were looking at. I suggested it was a person, probably a local, who was trying to prank people coming to the hill on the anniversary. At this point we started shouting at the person with the lights, yelling threats. The lights just kept swaying. Picture the scene: you're alone, maybe with a friend, playing a prank. In response, you hear a group of men making threats. Would you stick around? Suddenly the lights appeared to move closer to us. We were shocked, despite our numbers, and decided to retreat back into the previous field. Once back in the first field, we turned to look at the lights, and we could tell they were now much closer. Even in the darkness, we could tell they were close to the fence we had all just climbed over. Feeling very scared, we all began walking up the hill. The ground was wet and muddy, and we found it difficult to climb, slipping on the mud as we did. This only heightened our fear. At some point I looked behind us, and the lights were now clearly at the end of the field we were in. Eventually we reached the top of the hill. There was a bench there, presumably for people to sit and admire the view. The lights had vanished, and we began discussing what we'd seen. Suddenly I noticed black shapes moving between us and the town lights in the distance. These shapes were big and were definitely not far from where we sat. As we watched, I was able to make out the shapes. It was horses, dozens and dozens of horses, all silent, none of which we'd seen on our way down the hill or on the way back up. That was it for us. We went to the fence and climbed over back into the country lane. As we walked back to our cars, we again discussed what was going on. At that point, Out of nowhere, we heard the very loud whinny of a horse. It sounded like it was right behind us. As we all turned around, there was nothing there. We headed back to our cars and left. I don't know what we saw that night. I'd never experienced anything like that before or since. Perhaps if I'd been alone, I could chalk it up to imagination, but there were 6 of us, and we all saw the same things. In October of 2016, I had a nightmare where I was in the living room of my house. Everything was eerily dim. Not a sound was made, and I don't recall any sound at all during the course of the dream. I don't know how long I just stood there, but at one point or another, a gruesome thought came into my mind. An ashy gray head whose chalky skin was flaking off in large chunks. It had no ears and empty sockets where eyes should be. When I snapped back to reality, a large portion of the wall in front of me was replaced with that horrific visage. It just stared at me, with no emotion in its face. I couldn't move, nor could I make a sound. I awoke with a scream. It was around 3:15 a.m. When I closed my eyes to try to fall asleep again, I saw what I now refer to as the gray man due to his appearance. Whenever it was anything but bright out, closing my eyes would make me see it. For 2 to 3 months after my encounter with the gray man, I had nightmares almost every night. Before and after this period, I have rarely ever had nightmares. This makes it all the more unnerving. Each nightmare was completely distinct but equally terrifying. Gradually, I became more weary of sleep. I jumped at the smallest things. Things got awful. I was bordering on hypnophobia, a fear of sleep. Things began to happen in real life, too. A shadowy mist followed me through the corner of my eyes. I constantly felt like I was being watched. At one point, an acoustic guitar I had lying around fell of its own accord just as I was talking about the paranormal with my brother. It came to a climax when I awoke in the early hours of the day. I went into the hallway from my bedroom, but when I looked left to see where the rest of my family was sleeping, this tall woman was looking at me. She was completely featureless, save for her claws for hands, her long, messy black hair, and her face. Her eyes were black sunken dots in her head. Countless fangs were visible in her frown. I sprinted towards the living room, where I dreamt about the gray man screaming. When I looked back from the living room, she was gone. My entire family was awake and asked me what happened. I couldn't explain it, and they wouldn't have believed me if I could. A few days after that, I stopped going into my room altogether, instead opting to sleep on the couch. This is because whenever I was in there, I felt absolutely awful. Once I stopped being in my room, I immediately felt better, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Within a few weeks, I was happily sleeping as if this all never happened. To preface, I'm an incredibly skeptical person. I don't believe in ghosts or the paranormal. But there is one event in my life that presents a genuine conflict to me about what's real and what's not. I grew up in our generational home. My grandparents built it, raised my father and his siblings, and eventually my parents ended up owning the house. When I was about 6, we moved there. It's a peaceful and beautiful area, but steeped in a lot of dark history. The house is a short walk from an island that was a fortification for a militia that fought in the siege of Savannah. You can walk there and see the bunkers, find cannonballs, and plenty of Indian pottery. Most of the area was used for training and also had plenty of plantations. You can dig around in the backyard and find bullets and other relics. Because so much happened there, you can feel a palpable weight in the air. It's a unique energy of feeling like you are somewhere sacred. I don't know how to explain it exactly. However, I adored growing up there. I always felt comfortable, and it's the one place I can go to relax and feel at home. The house itself is a 2-story ranch-style building. My bedroom was upstairs, as was my sister's. My entire childhood, I was obsessed with technology and video games. On my 10th birthday, I was gifted a PS2 from my uncle. I was overjoyed, and we set it up in a room across from my bedroom, the exercise room, because my dad had set up a home gym in there. Needless to say, I spent the majority of my time in there playing video games, doing what I love. Now, here's the thing. In the back of the room, there is a large closet with heavy wooden doors that slide open from the middle. I never considered myself to be sensitive or anything of that nature, but the closet gave me the absolute creeps. I always felt like something was watching me from the closet. I had nightmares about the closet opening. I would close the room when I went to bed because I hated looking into its darkness at night. I kept all this to myself and never expressed my discomfort. But it all came to a head during a sleepover with my cousins. We decided to bunk on a mattress in the exercise room and all sleep together. I ended up on the side of the bed, right next to the closet. I was likely 11 or 12 at the time. As I tried to sleep, I experienced actual terror. A true fight or flight response just by being next to the closet. To this day I've never felt so terrified. It was like the pure energy and feeling coming from the closet was overwhelming me. I started crying and explained what I was feeling. They sympathized with me and let me sleep away from the closet. I eventually got to sleep, but that feeling has stuck with me for more than a decade. Well, that's cool and all, but being a child is an incredibly trippy experience, and I wrote it off as me letting my fear take over. I never forgot about it, but I never brought it up again. Most importantly to this story, I never told my dad. He's always been a no bullshit kind of guy when it comes to the paranormal. He had never in my life talked to me about any experiences he had until I was much older, moved out and married in my 20s. But one night at dinner, he opened up about his own unexplainable experience. Come to find out, the exercise room was his bedroom when he was growing up there. And he hated it as well. The same feeling of being watched, of pure dread, of overwhelming uncomfortability just being in its presence. Remember, I never told him of my experience, so I was amazed he was corroborating my own feelings. Then he explained something that I never thought would come out of his mouth, considering how much he is skeptic himself. One night, he was attempting to sleep and felt that familiar feeling. It grew stronger and stronger, until the closet forcefully threw itself open in front of him. He ran out of the room in absolute terror. The fact that we both had a similar experience with something of this nature, without ever directly communicating about it but having corroborating stories, is to this day the one thing I'll never be able to explain. I genuinely cannot come up with any theory other than that it is something we simply do not understand. I've always been a spiritual person. I get it from my mother. When I was about 10 years old, my mother and father divorced. For the better, my father is extremely abusive mentally. But, when I was about 12, 2 years after the divorce, my mother began dating another man. Now of course it didn't work out, but that man, I'll call him Jake, he was extremely spiritual, he practiced Reiki, he was all about chakras, but most importantly, he was heavily into spirits and assisting those who have passed. My mother fell in love with the practice, and so did I. I began learning how to communicate with spirits, helping them pass through to another life, as well as helping my friends get rid of spirits in their houses. Fast forward a few years, and I'm 17. I've been practicing this for a while, haven't had anything bad happen, so on and so forth. I was at a party, only a few people were there, maybe 4 to 5, and I decided to ask if anyone wants me to help them unblock their brain chakra, considering, as bad as it is, that I like to think it's a party trick and I can help many people at once. A few people say yes, and I get the first girl down and help her. Nothing much happens, she feels so much better, which makes the skeptics in the room feel so confused and want to know more. When I get to about the third person, she tells me something horrible. She's been seeing a lady. This lady is tall, completely blacked out, has a body like a tree, and spindly limbs. So of course I stop the session immediately and instantly feel the air get heavy. Not a good sign. The night goes on, and I'm only feeling slightly uneasy, everyone else is having fun. I leave at about 11 p.m. and drive home. It's only a 15-minute drive along well-lit roads. But as I was driving, there were a few instances where I saw something on the side of the road. I live in a very common area for roadkill, so I brush them off even though they look weird and just completely wrong to be roadkill. Not to mention every single time I looked in my rear view mirror, they were never there. Then, as I pull up at home, under the streetlight down the road, I see it. The same lady, staring at me. Her body blocked the light from the street lamp, and I kid you not, she was almost as tall as it. I managed to ignore her and get inside. The main thing you do in those situations is ignore it and protect yourself from it with mental chants, as weird as it sounds, but hey, it works. I was repeating mine, which is a very simple "you are not needed here, use my energy to find your path and leave us alone," but she didn't leave the street lamp. I could see her out the window. Now, that street light can be seen from the window next to the front door, the one I was looking out of, and the window in my mother's room, who was dead asleep. Hesitantly, I made my way to my room, got ready for bed, and fell asleep, still repeating my chant. The next morning I wake up, and that lady's is gone when I look out the windows. Thank the gods. I grab my breakfast and greet my mother, who is pale-faced. I ask her what's wrong, and she looks at me. Instantly, I know it. She saw the lady. The only thing is, I wasn't prepared for what she said next. There was a creature in my room last night. She explained she saw it in the mirror that sits across from her bed, and my heart sank. I ran to her room and looked in the mirror. Instantly, I felt like I was going to throw up. It was still there. We ended up saging that mirror, getting rid of it, and saging our whole house. She hasn't seen that creature again. but I know that it watches me when I sleep. I'm 18 now. I turned 19 in October. My name is David. I write this as I'm on I-5 South, getting as far away from what I'm about to share with you as possible. Let me take you to where it started to give you a better understanding of this horrific event. Friday morning 5:30 a.m., I lay in my bed as my dad comes in to wake me. Get up, we're getting an early start. Mom's downstairs are making eggs and bacon. I groan and shoot back with an I'm up, geez. Regretting not setting an alarm for earlier in the morning to give myself a chance to catch my bearings. I snap out of my exhausted days and sit on the edge of my bed. Throw on a flannel, pull up my curds, and lace up my danners before heading downstairs to meet my family for breakfast. It seems like a tradition now to come downstairs and sigh at the fact that I am an only child as of 2 years ago. Today is the anniversary of my older brother's death due to a tragic car accident with a drunk driver. I say hello to my mother and give her a hug, as we both know what dread we feel on this day. Dad quickly intervenes, "Hey champ, you all packed? Remember, it's quite the drive we've got ahead of us." "Yeah, Dad, I'm all ready. What time are we getting out of here?" I replied. "I'm ready when you are," he says. I give my mom one last hug for the weekend before we leave. Dad and I threw our bags in the back of the Dodge and hit the road. "You ready for this?" he asks. "Ready as I'll ever be," I replied. 2 hours into the trip, we stop at a rest stop to use the bathroom. An old man in tattered clothes smirks at me. "Headed up the mountain, are you?" he asks. "Yeah, just me and my dad this weekend," I shortly replied. "Be careful up there, there's evil in these woods, boy," he said before bellowing out a sinister chuckle. I hurry to wash up and get out of the bathroom, being unsettled now. I figured he was just a crazy old man. I've never been so wrong in my life. I meet Dad in the truck, and he can immediately tell I was thrown off. "Got something on your mind, bud?" I told him it was nothing and tried to brush off my previous interaction with the old man. A few more hours go by, and Dad takes a right turn and parks the truck. "We made it, buddy," he exclaimed. "What a beautiful drive." I replied. "Well, we really should get started setting up, it's going to get dark here soon," he says. We set up the tent and stove before starting the fire. As we sit around the fire, Dad hands me a beer. "You're 16 now. I know what kids get into, especially these days, so all I ask is that when you drink it's with me," he says. "You can read my mind, can you, old man?" I replied with a laugh. Our conversation ends abruptly as we both see something in the corner of our eyes, but as soon as it was there, it was gone. We brushed it off and finished up the night and put out the fire before hitting the sack. Saturday, 6 a.m., we both wake up at the sound of sticks breaking around the tent. Startled, we both grab our handguns in case of a cougar. But again, as soon as we heard it, it was over. Both on edge, we climb out of the tent to start a fire and brew some morning coffee. We both have a warm cup before strapping up for a hike. We set off on an unmarked trail, our first mistake if you don't count leaving after both unsettling events prior. We marked trees along the way so we don't get lost. All of a sudden we hear a faint screaming sound northeast of where we were headed on the trail. Both a little frightened, we unholstered our handguns and moved towards the screams. We stumbled upon a shack in a small clearing. As soon as we saw a glimpse of it, the scream stopped on a dime. Both not realizing it, we rushed towards the shack and busted in. Immediately after the door flew open, we both couldn't hold our stomachs from the smell. We both threw up our coffee and trail mix from this morning. We both look at each other with disturbed looks on our faces as we progress deeper into the shack. Inside the shack is an all too familiar face. Staring back at me with an unnaturally wide grin is the old man. This time with deep, dark pits for eyes and a set of long, sharp, and bloody teeth. He repeated his previous statement, "There's evil in these woods." The smell was immediately identifiable, as he was standing next to a pile of rotting corpses. I hear a quick run from my dad as we turn around and bolt for the door. As we run, we realize we've lost our trail markers. Dad tells me he knows which direction leads to the truck. As we sprint through the woods in desperate hope to find camp, there are unnaturally tall, slender creatures staring from the trees. They're jet black and almost look like shadows. They have no expression, no features, but we can feel their gaze pierce us as we dash through the woods. We can hear the old man's voice taunting us as we run. Getting closer and closer. Though it's more grave and sounds almost as if there's hundreds of the same voice talking at the same time. As we move further towards the truck, Dad falls over. He reaches for his lungs as if they were collapsing. He hands me his keys and tells me to keep going. As soon as this happens, the creature lurches for my dad and rips his foot clean off as the thing does, so my dad immediately draws his gun and desperately empties his magazine on the creature. Yelling at me to run, I finally give in and book it in the direction he was taking us. Not too long after, I see the smoke from the embers of the fire we started this morning. With a silent yell of relief, I book it towards the truck. What I see at camp will stick with me forever. In the fire was my dad's mangled corpse, which was the smoke that I saw from the tree line. Absolutely mortified, I started bawling but quickly snapped out of my state when the creature's voice erupted from in the trees. I fumbled with the keys before jumping in the truck and pulling out. Cruising down the mountain faster than I've ever driven before, I can still see the shadow figures in the trees. After a long and fast-paced drive home, I feel like I've made it in record time. I hurry to get my mom out of the house and fill her in. We can't stop crying about Dad. I don't know what to do, but for now my mom is taking us towards California and far away from whatever that thing was. I can still hear him yelling in the distance. I'm scared. As of now, that thing is still out there. Hunting. If you find a cabin in the woods of NW, Oregon, don't listen to the screams. I experienced it 3 times in my life. Believe it or not, I'm not a religious person, nor do I have these beliefs in my mind to start with. I'm always in doubt until I experience it on my own. First ever experience at 14 years old. I lived in the Japanese countryside at that time and stayed in my stepmother's family house. It's a very old wooden house, and on the 2nd floor you can hear the sound when someone walks around. One day I had to stay there alone for a few days. On my first night I heard someone walking up the stairs at midnight, and on my second night someone ran around on the 2nd floor. I checked on it both nights but couldn't see anything. At that time I thought to myself that because the house was old and I was alone, maybe it made all that sound, but I couldn't hear it when other people were in the house. My second experience was when I visited and stayed in my friend's cottage during the summer break close to Algonquin, Canada. I stayed there a few weeks with a bunch of kids and my 2 other friends, basically babysitting friends, brother and sister at that point, and in the evening they were out playing tag, and I was always out checking for them because forest is right next to it. This one particular evening, one kid went onto the forest, and I had to go in after him. After about 5 minutes of chasing and looking for him, I found him standing still in the middle of the forest. I went in and asked if everything was alright, and he told me, "There are a group of people in a bear suit here." At first I didn't think of anything because Algonquin Park has people go hiking all the time. But it seemed to trouble him, so I asked him again, "What does a bear suit look like?" As I carried him back, he then pointed behind my back, and I suddenly felt hot, like something blocking the wind behind me. I turned around to look, and the forest somehow felt darker and strangely quiet, like all the wind sounds had completely stopped. Then came the whisper-like sound of a human talking, not English or French, from that direction, but nobody was there. The forest is not dense, mind you. Part of me wants to stand there and wait to see what's going on, but I ran out with that kid in my arm like a bear is chasing me instead. I never know what I experienced, but that kid claimed he saw a group of people in a bearskin suit with a club and bow. I still wonder what group of people went hiking with that equipment. Algonquin is a place with wildlife as well, but I don't think hunting is ever allowed there. My last experience was when I went on vacation in South Thailand just a few years ago. A Thai friend let me rent his house. He did not stay with us. That was close to the beach but very isolated from town or people. I stayed there with another friend, and on our 4th night we headed back from the town at midnight. My friend was wasted, but I am pretty sober. As I arrived at the house, I noticed a lady on the balcony of the 2nd floor. I came in and carried my friend to his bedroom on the 2nd floor. I looked out to the balcony to see it locked up, so I rested my friend close to the stairs and went on to check if someone was out there, only to see nobody and the door to the balcony still locked tight. I was confused and started to paranoid that someone else might be inside. The next day in the afternoon, my friend then asked awkwardly, "Who is that girl you bought back with?" He claimed to have seen a girl walk down the stairs as I went to the balcony. Long story short, we looked at each other and decided to move out into the town hotel/motel that evening. Never talk about it to my friends ever again, but it's still on my mind to this day. What I experienced could be something normal that I couldn't explain. However, in those moments, the confusion, paranoidness, and fear of the unexplainable kicked in, and I could pretty much assume things on my own. Still, it was an experience that I will never forget, and that brought me to believe in things that can't be explained. About 10 years ago, I was finishing up my last year at a local college in Houston and working my way through school. Somehow, I managed to support myself entirely and pay for tuition by spending my evenings tutoring. As I was walking towards one of my students' front doors one day, I saw a tiny disheveled kitten hiding in their garden. I've always been the kind of person that felt more than the usual amount of compassion for hurt or simply stray animals, so I carried around a bag of kibbles in my truck for times like these. I tutored the kids in this home a couple of times per week and looked around for this kitten every time, but only managed to spot it and pour out some food for it on random days. I had planned to try to catch and foster it, putting it up for adoption, but it was clearly feral and too scared of people to easily catch. After a couple of weeks of not seeing the kitten, I was surprised to see it one day as I drove around the corner towards the house. As I parked my truck, a pack of 3 dogs that I had never seen before zoomed past, and before I was even able to open my door, the largest dog snatched the kitten by the neck, shaking it violently. The dog dropped the kitten as I ran towards them, but it was too late, and all I could do was crouch down beside the kitten as it took a quick final breath. There was nothing I could do at that point but to ring my student's doorbell and work on 3rd grade math with her for the next hour before my next stop. I was pretty bummed out for the rest of the night but followed through with work along with my usual home routine before bed. I remember going to sleep a bit earlier than normal to put the day to an end. The next thing I remember was standing inside my closet, looking towards the left wall beyond the closet doors. I wasn't staring at the wall though, but rather a pitch black circle, about 3 feet wide in diameter, directly in front of the wall, darker than the darkness that surrounded it. Like most people's homes, even with the room lights off, the glow of the street lights shines into my bedroom through the blinds, allowing me to see enough to walk around without running into things. I remember wondering how this circle managed to be so much darker than the rest of my bedroom, but before I could come up with an explanation, I began to hear a deep voice coming from this perfect circle. I specifically remember questioning how the language that I was hearing was not English or Spanish, but I understood it perfectly and felt the message like a warm hug. This large black circle kept saying something along the lines of "Don't be scared, don't be worried, thank you." I didn't feel any fear, only peace and comfort, before the perfect circle faded away, and I turned to my left beyond the double doors of my closet, towards my bed, and saw myself in bed, still asleep. When I woke up the next day, the only thing I could figure out was that somehow, this tiny stray calico kitten wanted to tell me something, spirit to spirit. Things like this have happened to me before, since about the age of 7 or 8 when I saw a boy standing at the foot of my bed. He looked somewhat like my brother but was in grayscale, and I could see the closed door of our shared bedroom through his body. I know I was awake because I remember feeling the cold, textured wall against my back as I sat up in my bed, rubbed my eyes, looked towards my brother's bed, and saw him asleep before turning back towards the boy standing at the foot of my bed. We locked eyes, and he cracked a friendly smile before lifting his left palm and dropping 4 of his fingers, signaling goodbye before fading away. Like my experience with the black circle, I felt zero fear, so I didn't feel the need to wake my brother up or run to my parents' room. I simply repositioned myself in bed and went back to sleep. I can't 15 minutes, ice cold and dark purple, surrounded by an already grieving family, before I somehow gasped after a final CPR attempt and came back. This was rural Mexico around 1990, and instead of taking me to a hospital, they watched me sleep for an entire day, not knowing what to expect when I finally woke up. Apparently there was no brain damage. I joke around with my mom sometimes and tell her that if she had been more careful with me, I might have been a genius and not just slightly above average. Who knows how many brain cells I lost that day. I've even heard that letting someone fall into a deep sleep right after being brought back is not exactly recommended, but I guess everything worked out for the best. Sometimes I wonder if maybe I was on the other side for long enough to be able to receive visitors from time to time. My gram told me a story recently about her brother and sister when they were a couple days from death. While bedridden in her home, my Gram's sister insisted that there was a group of children watching for days before she finally passed. When asked what the children looked like, she could not describe them, saying that they were too dark. Luckily, she loved children, so this was more of a comforting presence. Now my Gram's brother had a different experience. He was your classic tough bastard who would always refuse medical care. He spent his last days in his favorite rocker, but about 2 days before he died, he kept complaining about a tall man with a brimmed hat standing in the corner. He would continuously try and get him to leave, yelling at him and asking other people to tell him to go as well. When asked what he looked like, he said he was like a shadow. Does anyone have any similar stories? Or explanation? I think I just saw what my daughter is afraid of. To give you some context, I'm 25, my husband is 31, and my kids are 5 female and 7 male. We live in a 1-bedroom apartment in a complex built in the early 80s in the central area of town. I'm pretty sure there's a child here. Harmless moves my kids' toys around to weird places. One occasion, 3 really loud knocks right above mine and my daughter's heads while we are lying in bed watching a movie. I've had people say the 3 knocks could be bad, but honestly, I've never had any uncomfortable or malicious vibes from anything here. Until tonight. So, originally, we had turned out the dining room into a bedroom for the kids, but recently we switched things around and put the kids into the bedroom and separated their bunk beds to have one on each side of the room. Since the switch, my daughter, 5, has been petrified of being in the room by herself, even with the TV on and the nightlight they have. It's a Starkey sky projector and lights up their entire room with stars and moons, and it spins. It's not dark in there. Normal kid behavior, you'd think. But, when my husband and I had the bedroom, she had zero problem laying in my bed with nothing on but the TV on and then in pitch black, so long as we left the door cracked. This is where stuff starts getting strange. Multiple times I've gone to open their door and it's locked, one of those simple locks you literally open with your fingernail, but still. And it's not them. I'll close their door and go to check on them, and it will be locked. It's never locked itself. Toys have come up broken, and they swear it's not them. The weirdest one, my cat loves the closet. I have a blanket pile stored in there that she loves to sleep on. She even keeps her toys stashed in there. Since we switched, she moved her toys behind the couch and will not sleep in the closet anymore. And it's not my kids, she loves them. It was totally common to find her snuggled up to them in their beds when they were in the dining area. Now, she won't sleep with the kids, like she loves to do, and she won't sleep in her favorite spot. So tonight, I'm lying in bed next to my husband. We turn on a movie. From our bed, I can see most of my living room, and very clearing the archway to the hallway, then bathroom door. To the right in the hall is the bedroom. I turned to say something to my husband, and then I saw, what I was positive, was my son walking from the hallway. It's kind of dark, so it was shadowy, like someone would look in a dark room, if that makes sense, across the living room to our living chair/ottoman, which he does a lot, but then I suddenly felt really, really hot, like when you have a hot flash, overall uncomfortable, and just the weight on my chest, and got really anxious and asked my husband, is that one of the kids? Go look, he asked what I was talking about, and I said, get up, see if there's a kid in the chair. He got up, nothing in the chair, looked in the room, and they were sleeping peacefully, unmoved. So I get up, feeling nervous for absolutely no reason, and sure enough, there is nothing. This is an odd detail, but I swallowed what felt like swallowing a marble, and then the feeling vanished and I felt back normal, other than completely confused by the fact that I just saw a shadow figure the exact size of my son walk from his room to a chair and then nothing, and from across a room could make me feel so uncomfortable. Now, I'd pass this off as my usual sensitivity to spirits, but when I told my husband about it, he said, it's fine, baby. You'd think you of all people would be used to spirits by now, which I am, but this was different. I've never felt the way this one made me feel when my husband said something that, for a reason I still don't get, makes sense to me. He said, Jane told me last night she doesn't like to be alone in her room because something moves around in there, but only when she's by herself in the dark. I'd cow, but I know it's the same thing that's bothering her. I'm going to talk to her tomorrow as she's asleep. All I know is that it's not the same thing that's been here since we moved in. It was essentially harmless and almost playful, which is why I feel like a child. When I felt its presence, that was it. I just kinda became aware, acknowledged it, and moved. But this one with the emotional pull strings he pulled, the breaking toys, locking me out, and overall making my cat scared, it's definitely something new. And I have no idea how to cope with this. I've never had any kind of negative unknown in my home. So last night I decided to just sleep a whole night in the room with kids. Before I say this, I have problems sleeping, I always have. The only thing that helps is sleeping medication that I don't like taking because it makes me sleep too long. Last night I woke up suddenly, looked at my phone, and it was 2:45. I sat up and looked around for a moment. I definitely didn't see anything. I didn't really feel anything aside from the air feeling slightly thick. It also doesn't really have great airflow, so I switched their fan on and laid back down. I closed my eyes and fell back asleep next to my daughter, but it was one of those sleeps where you're still conscious of what's around you. So, what I was woken up to, you guys remember those sticky slap hands? They were gooey, had a long stretchy thing you'd hold while you sling the goo hand at, your brother's face or at something you were trying to pick up? Specifically, that slapping sound of hitting a wall and then pulling off is what I'm referencing. I was woken up to that sound, as if we were walking up the wall. I can't describe it like slap pull up, as if you had two slap hands and were making it walk. I'm probably wasting time explaining something you guys are gonna just be like, WTF is she on about, lol, sorry. It was a weird ass noise. Anyways, so when I fell back asleep, it felt as if it happened as soon as I closed my eyes, but really, once I woke up to the slap/walking sound, I looked at my phone and it was 3:15. As soon as I opened my eyes, the sound stopped, and it was quiet. I don't know how many people read my comment about when I asked my daughter about it, but she had said she can't open her eyes, and then when she can open her eyes, it runs away too fast, and said that it sounds like it's moving her stuff around. She specifically mentioned the TV in her schoolhouse. It's a small dollhouse that is a school. It has a bell tower with a real bell, which is why she knows it's that toy. I'll just come back and paste what she said when I'm done with this. But anyways, her telling me that it only made sounds and moved when her eyes were closed, hit me there. I sat up. I felt the same anxiety and discomfort I had felt the night before when I thought I saw my son, but I wasn't scared. I was pissed. I had said out loud, "All right, if this was your house before, fine. But it's mine now, and you're scaring my child, and I won't ducking allow it. I don't know who or what you are, and I don't care. You're not welcome here anymore with your ill intent. You've frightened my daughter, and you've lost my respect for your presence. Leave at your own will before you are painfully forced. Either way, the end result will be I have my home back and Janie won't be afraid anymore." I don't know if I pissed it off or if it will listen, but after I said what I said, everything felt normal. No anxiety or discomfort, the air lightened, and I went back to sleep until I woke up today at 8:30 a.m. Time will tell. Today I'm going to my mills to get my crystals, rock salts, and my sage. Yes, it's blessed, and going to do a cleansing. I don't know what this is, but like I said, the fact that it's ducking with and scaring my 5-year-old to the point she's afraid to sleep in her own bed pisses me off beyond all belief. I have respect for the dead. If this were their home and they could coexist peacefully, I'm always welcome to that. When it was just hide and seek with the toys and innocent harmless things, it was fine. But it's not fine anymore. This story happened when I was in my hometown. For context, I'm a female, 20 now, and I think I was around 11, although I can't quite remember my exact age. Anyways, my family and I got invited over for dinner with some other people as well. The family that was hosting the dinner were very nice. I think the wife was friends with my mom, a teacher. Off topic, sorry. I was an only child growing up, so I might have been a bit bored there. In my kid mind, I thought it would be cool to see what movies these people had, so I headed downstairs. I'm a nerd and I love movies, although now of course I would never do that, but I had asked my mom permission before I went. So I found the DVDs, and I was looking through what they had. Where I was sitting, you couldn't see the rest of the downstairs because there was like a small wall/ledge or something that hid me. Standing at my current height, 5,5, it would probably reach my torso. I mention this because it'll become important. Anyway, as I was looking through what they had, I heard a noise. It sounded like someone else was downstairs with me. Nothing like someone clearing their throat or anything, but like someone brushed past something. I was alert now and slightly scared. I said, "Hello?" But no response. I thought maybe this family had an older kid down here, but I had no idea who or what was out there with me, one little girl by herself. So I peered over that ledge, and staring back at me was a black figure, peeking from behind a door frame. I say black, and I really mean pitch black, with no face or features. Just like one of those signs that shows a silhouette of a human on bathroom doors. The thing was only there for a second before it ducked back to out of sight, and I heard more shuffling and movement. I went back down, and now I was officially terrified. I sat there, way too scared to move. I don't know what I would have done. Likely there was a light in the storm of fear as I heard my mom calling my name. She had come to check on me, I guess, and I bolted from where I was and I was saved. Thanks, Mom, for coming for me. My mom still remembers how scared I was. The family moved away, and a few years ago I met the dad, who, by the way, was a policeman, at our friend's cabin. I asked him if there was anyone else downstairs that day, and no. There wasn't. So I don't know if I saw someone who had broken in or if I saw a shadow person. I really don't know, but I do know that I was terrified. Anyways, I haven't been back to that house, and I've moved away from my hometown. Sorry if this felt long, but I wanted to share my story of how I saw something. Or someone with no features, just pure black. I think if it was someone breaking in, me being there might have scared them off. Although I never heard any door open or close. I was a patient in a general hospital and was seriously ill. I was on the upper third floor in the ICU unit. My room was all clear glass walls and situated so that it faced the nurses' station, and the nurses had a clear eye shot of me. Apparently I was so critical one afternoon that they notified my family and told them to come prepared to say their goodbyes and to call our pastor. That afternoon I was in and out of consciousness, running a fever of 105 degrees and laying naked on an ice mattress covered by a thin sheet. I couldn't get my eyes to stay open long, but I could hear everything, and I remember hearing the doctor say to a nurse, "I'm really worried." I think we're losing her. Then I hear them both leave the room. It felt like seconds later, but it could have been hours when I suddenly felt someone touch my foot. I tried to open my eyes but couldn't. Then I heard what sounded like old women whispering to each other as they removed the sheet so they could touch skin. I felt them hold my foot in their hands as they started praying in earnest, and then they started singing and chanted words I couldn't make out. I opened my eyes because they were singing so beautifully that I wanted to see who they were. When I did get my eyes open, I was surprised to see 3 Amish-like women dressed all in white. They saw me looking and looked up at me with piercing sky blue eyes and smiled the sweetest, kindest smiles at me that I thought I was hallucinating, so I smiled back, closed my eyes, and drifted back to sleep. What felt like seconds again. I heard a loud beeping noise, and then a nurse entered my room, and she felt my face and forehead and exclaimed, "Doctor, come quick." Then I heard the doctor come in, and he asked me if I could hear him to squeeze his hand, so I squeezed his hand and then forced my eyes to open. The doctor then exclaimed, "Welcome back, sleepyhead." After that, everything was a whirlwind of activity, with several doctors and many nurses coming in to see me and poke and prod my body. I tried to sit up, and the nurse asked me if I wanted something to drink. I remember saying I was hungry, all of them laughing, and a nurse saying, "I bet you are." Fast forward 2 days, and I'm sitting up eating like nothing was ever wrong while the nurses told me all about how sick I'd been and how they never thought they'd see the day that I would get out of bed, let alone be back to normal. According to them, I'd been in the hospital for 32 days, and half of those were in a coma with high fevers over 105 degrees. They said several times they thought I was dying. While listening to them, they would take turns asking me questions like, had I been able to hear or see anything while I was unconscious? I told them, yeah, bits and pieces, but I heard clearly the 3 Amish women who had come in and laid hands on me and prayed and sang. All 3 nurses looked shocked and said, "3 Amish women?" And I said yes. They looked confused and glanced back and forth to each other, and finally one said, "You must have been visited by angels because no one has been up here to see you, no visitors have been allowed. Are you sure it was 3 Amish women?" I shook my head yes and said they were all dressed in white and were touching my foot while they prayed over me and sang beautifully. They then asked me, "When was that? Do you remember?" And I said yeah, right before you came in, pointing to a nurse, and called for the doctor to come. The nurse gasped and said, "That's when you came out of your coma. And your temperature dropped to normal from 105 degrees. You were definitely visited by something or someone not of this world because no one has been allowed up to see you. Your room is made of clear glass, and we can see who enters and who walks by." I said, "Well, maybe while you were away from the desk?" And they all chimed in that that was impossible because critical patients are assigned 24-hour nurses and are never left unattended. Fast forward another week, and I was being released from the hospital, and as they wheeled me out, all the doctors and nurses were there clapping and cheering, and the doctor again said, "I never thought I'd get to see this day." And with tears in his eyes, he handed me a bouquet of balloons, and off I went out the door. Since then, several other patients have asked about the Amish woman, but no one knows who they are. Sadly, the hospital has since been torn down, so I guess we'll never know who these mysterious Amish women were. I used to live in a weird area, and I have some things I need to share. Let me emphasize that I had not had a paranormal experience before this, and I haven't had one since. Shit, I'm the kind of person who has taken Ouija boards to cemeteries and abandoned mental asylums and nothing has come of them. Still, these following events are the only inexplicable things to have happened to me in this one area and one time period. They take place in both my house and the woods next to them, so I'm including them all. So years ago, I lived in the suburbs of a Texas town. My family moved there when I was maybe 11 or 12 and stayed there until my freshman year of high school. We lived by a church, and beyond that was a large stretch of woods. If you walked far enough through it, maybe a dozen or so acres, you'd run into even more suburbs. So it was basically this portion of forest in the middle of the town. Me and my friends used to tromp through those woods all the time. It was familiar ground to us, but there was always something eerie about them. You know that feeling you get when you're in the middle of nowhere and it's kind of like you're being watched? Like someone wants you to leave? That was basically the pervasive air about those woods. Me and my friends loved those woods, though. Couple things I want to mention real quick. I never encountered another person in those woods ever. Usually my friends and I went together, but sometimes we went through alone. We seemed to be the only people who bothered. Secondly, I've explored and hiked through many forested areas, both before and after I lived there. I've lived in a rustic Michigan log cabin where the nearest house was 20 miles away. Aside from the woods where these events took place, I have never experienced that inexplicable dread. There were a couple of abnormal things that happened, besides that unsettling feeling. Occasionally we would find the bodies of mauled animals. Around there, we had a lot of white-tailed deer, and they were comfortable in urban areas. They came up to people's lawns and such, but there were no coyotes inside the town. Every now and then we'd see some tattered up carcass of a deer, guts hanging out and legs ripped off. Like I said, there were no natural predators around there. They didn't even look like they were killed for food. Wild dogs? Maybe, but we didn't see any, and animal control would have been all over that. But here's where it gets straight bizarre. My friend Marie came to me one day, very shaken, and told me she had something to show me in the woods. She had discovered the bodies of possums torn in half and strewn about one of our trails. Together we gathered our usual weapons, a sturdy walking stick, a switchblade each, a screwdriver, and a metal baseball bat. We were kids, okay? And ventured into the forest about half a mile in, towards an obscure clearing. I smelled them rotting before I saw them, and then there they were, 3 front ends and 3 back ends on either side of the trail we were walking on. I remember seeing their spines sticking out. They looked like they had been dead and left out for a while. That wasn't all, though. My friend told me there was something in the clearing I needed to see. So we kept walking the trail, and at the end was a large tree stump stained with what appeared to be dried blood. Now this tree stump was jagged, like someone had done a bad job chopping it down, so it looked like it had 3 prongs sticking up. We were both pretty freaked at this point, and of course even more aware than usual of that peculiar feeling that our presence was unwanted. We circled around looking for more clues, then continued to walk through the woods beyond the clearing. We found 2 more mutilated possums along the way. That's when one of us spotted something else, way off the beaten path. There was a narrow, circular hole someone had apparently dug into the ground. It looked like it dropped pretty deeply. It was situated in a way that you would have to duck under and weave through branches and thicket to reach it. I started walking towards it, but my friend grabbed me and held me back. Marie proceeded to tell me that her Wiccan friend Cindy had recently warned her not to look into any holes that you find. Marie explained that supposedly about a week earlier, Cindy had had a dream that featured Marie, and the dream had transformed into some nightmarish vision with bottomless holes and warping landscapes and demons. I'm not really clear on the details, but in any case, it inspired Cindy to call Marie and share this baffling bit of advice. Marie hadn't mentioned this up until this moment. Keep in mind that as we were junior high kids, Cindy was probably not a full-fledged practicing Wiccan, but still. It was enough to trip us out. I was already spooked, and that pretty much sent me over my edge. At that point we left without looking in the dugout hole because we were total pussies, I guess. I'm still kind of pissed at myself for not checking it out. Of course, when we return a week later, there's no trace of any of it. We figured it was all probably the work of a couple of ducked up kids wanting to worship Satan or something. The tree stump did look like some kind of altar. However, eventually it just became a cool story that we weren't scared of anymore, and while the occasional dead deer did turn up throughout the years we lived there, for the most part we enjoyed hanging out there. This wasn't the last thing that happened in the woods, but I'll come back to that. As for the house, it had its share of strange occurrences as well. There was a room where electronic appliances would turn on and off at random, but my family didn't think much of it at the time. Naturally, I ended up in this room. The first distinctively weird occurrence happened when I was home alone. At this point I had discovered a couple of dead deer in the woods, but I can't remember if I had seen the possum/trunk altar/hole in the ground yet. I was in the office room screwing around on the computer when I heard footsteps running down the hall. I could hear the weight reverberate in the empty hall, and I could hear that they were wearing shoes. It's a pretty unmistakable sound. The footfalls seemed to reach the end of the hall before it turned back to run the distance back. Back and forth. Not even faint, but very clear. I called out, but no one answered. When I got up to check it out, it stopped. This is when I started to worry that my house was perhaps haunted, my room particularly. My otherwise docile pets were beginning to spontaneously growl or hiss at corners in my room. My TV, radio, and fan were still regularly turning off, on, or changing channels. I'd wake up and see that my door was open when I had left it closed. Also, my parents were going through a rough divorce at this time, which left my father sleeping on the couch. Sorry, Dad. He reported seeing solid-looking shadows seemingly walk down the hall and through my door, and that sometimes he'd see my door creak open on its own. He only mentioned it because he wanted to know if I was the one doing it. I also had an odd experience involving orchestra music near the bathroom, which I wrote about here. This all was building up. The footsteps thing happened maybe 2 or 3 more times. I once felt a hand rest on my shoulder. I could feel the pressure of the fingers and everything. I was of course alone in the backyard in the dead of night, where I habitually would sit to listen to music. I whip around, there's nobody there, and I run inside. But the point that had me convinced was one night when I was staying up late in my bed playing my Game Boy SP. Out of nowhere, my closet door across the room begins making an awful racket, like somebody was shaking it. Violently. It was rattling in its frame. Simultaneously, both my fan and radio, which had been on for background noise, suddenly turned off. The closet shook for, God knows, maybe 5 seconds before it stopped. I ran out and woke up the whole damn family, and when I checked out the inside of it, of course there is nothing out of the ordinary. The very final thing that happened was absolutely terrifying. As I mentioned, my parents had been going through a horrific divorce. It culminated in one of my final months living there, when they ended up yelling at each other and throwing objects against the wall late one night. Me and my brothers are woken up by it. It's about 1 or 2 in the morning, and we figure out quickly that apparently, either my mother or my father is brandishing a knife. My oldest brother charges in there, there's awful screaming and crying, and my brother is shouting orders, and I just sort of decide I can't be there right now. I walk out the door and decide to go where I usually go for solace, the woods. I had never been there at night before, but as you can guess, I was feeling too numb and angsty to be scared. I ended up at one of my favorite hangouts, which was pretty far in. There was this tall, gnarled tree where we had secured lawn chairs onto the branches with rope. I climbed up to the very top chair and just sat there for maybe 20 minutes. I begin to notice that there is something or someone rustling in the leaves somewhere below me. I freeze up and am suddenly aware of how utterly terrifying it is to be alone in the woods at this hour. The moon's not bright enough to see the ground below me. I hear the foliage snapping and swaying almost directly below the tree. It sounds like a creature moving very slowly. And I shit you not, he or she / it was making a sound. It was like if you said the word mum over and over again in succession. Like yum, but quietly and tonelessly. I know that sounds like crazy bullshit, but I swear to God, I was pissing myself. I know what deer sound like, I know they can make strange may sounds, but this sounded like somebody was muttering it incessantly, and it had a slight whine in it. And they just kept ducking walking around that tree, making that creepy noise, and I was ducking praying. Every once in a while they would stop murmuring, but they would continue walking ceaselessly around the tree. And then they'd just start up making that sound again. I can't judge how long that was on for. Then finally I hear something else come crashing through the underbrush from behind me, and I can't hear that other unnatural noise below me anymore. It just stops completely while I can hear the second noise source coming up fast. I'm utterly silent, hard in my throat, and then I hear my brother's voice from some distance off, and I can't express to you how grateful I was. He was the second noise that was crashing through the woods, looking for me, and his appearance made the other thing vanish or scurry off or whatever. The next day I asked my friends if they were in the woods that night, and their reactions were identical. Why in God's name would anybody go into those woods at night? So that's my story, sorry for the crazy length. That encounter in the woods was the last weird thing, as the family split up and moved out of the house soon after. In case you're wondering, nobody got stabbed that night either. Thanks for listening, guys. About 3 years ago, I was working at a private school in San Luis Potosí, Mexico. I was teaching 5th grade. Every year, around April, this school takes the kids to a pretty cool camp in the mountains for Children's Day. It's about 45 minutes away from the city, in a mountain system called the Sierra de Alvarez. You have to get off the highway and go up the mountains for another 20 minutes, passing a small village and a beautiful road full of trees, squirrels, and coyotes. For 3 days, children get to go ziplining and rappelling and hiking and other stuff, and at night, teachers get to look after them the whole night while they play around in the cabins. This part, I hated. The camp has 4 big cabins that can host up to 20 people. Nothing fancy though, they're just big rooms with huge cement bunk beds and 1 bathroom each. There's no electricity or running water whatsoever, for the full experience. And there's a small cabin for 2 people, usually used for principals, a dining area, a kitchen, and a big room that they use for different activities. That year, 2019, we left school on a Wednesday morning and got to the camp around 10 a.m. Children were divided into 4 groups, and each group was given a cabin. Then, us teachers decided which group we were going to stay with. That particular time was special because one of our coordinators, Patty, had gone to the camp with us, which was unusual, but she was all about the adventure, and since she was in the higher ranks, she got cabin number 5 all for herself. I, on the other hand, was staying in one of the girls' cabins. The first night, we were sent to our cabins at 9 p.m. after having dinner. Girls had taken up the upper part of the bunk bed, and by 10 p.m. they had already started their party. I took a spot in the lower bed and read a book, making sure that girls didn't go too wild or out of the cabin. At around 11 p.m., The girls asked me to climb up to their party to ask me some questions and give them some advice about boys. They were 5th graders, so it was basically which one they should choose, the one with freckles or the one with pretty hair. So we were talking and laughing, making jokes, when, all of a sudden, Patty, the coordinator, came barreling into our cabin all scared, shaking, and almost crying. We were startled but worried about her, so we sat her on the bed and tried to help her calm down. When she relaxed a little bit, we asked her what had happened, and she said that while she was in her cabin's bathroom, she had heard a rustling sound, and when she pointed her flashlight towards it, there was a little mouse looking at her. That's when panic hit, and she ran out into the darkness, then into our room. There was a moment of silence, and then all of the girls began laughing so hard that I couldn't hold it any longer and started laughing myself. Then it was Patty's turn to burst into wild laughter. We gave her a little bit of a rough time about it, but of course we let her spend the night with us. The next day was pretty normal. Kids were doing camp stuff with the guides, while teachers drank coffee waiting for the night. It was March, and by that time I had already decided to quit my job at the end of the school year, so since it was my last time at this camp, I decided to really enjoy it. That day I went for a 3-hour walk, took pictures, climbed little hills, and sat under a beautiful tree. I was thrilled that day. However, it was during the second night that things got really ugly. But before I tell you about it, I need to stop a little bit and describe the cabin's layout for better understanding. The cabin is basically a big rectangular room, say 10 by 5 mts. If you stand in front of it, the door behind your head, you're literally floor level, same with the bathroom window. Having said that, let's continue. The second night, the girls were all crammed on the upper part of the bunk beds, and Patty and I were on the lower part. She didn't want to be roommates with the mouse, so she stayed with us again. Girls were laughing and eating all kinds of junk food, playing truth or dare and other kids' games. Patty and I were sure that the girls were fine and not about to start diving into the floor, so we were kind of dozing out. At around 11:01, the girls started screaming bloody murder because she had seen a face on one of the windows behind them. Patty, I, and the rest of the girls, although startled, tried to calm her down. We got up and told her that it was probably one of the boys that got out of his cabin and was trying to scare them. This seemed to make sense to her, and she went back to whatever they were doing. But that wasn't possible because those windows were at ground level, remember? Not completely covered by it, but let's say half and half. By 12 p.m., every girl in that room, Patty included, was sound asleep, which I found pretty odd. Compared to other years, girls would stay up almost all night. Nonetheless, I was so grateful because I was going to be able to get some sleep, and so I did. By the way, the spot I took on the bed was right next to the shelf where the mattress ended. At 2 a.m., I looked at my cell phone. I woke up needing to go to the bathroom, hating my bladder for making me get out of my warm nest. The floor was super cold, so I had to put on my shoes, and doing so woke me up for good. I went ahead, did my thing, all good, but as I was about to go back to bed, I noticed that the window was open, and I had made sure it was closed before we went to sleep. As I said, it was very cold, but I figured it had been one of the girls and just reached out to close it. I took a quick peek outside the window, and I saw 2 dark figures about 40 feet down the hill. One of them was sort of crouching, and the other one was standing right next to it. I only had the night skylight, so I couldn't make them out well. First I thought they were people, but then again, I gave myself a satisfactory explanation. They're just cows. These hills are swarming with cows and bulls, Annie. And just as the girl did earlier, I believed my own story, and I went back to bed. As I laid down and was fighting with my 3 blankets, I had this horrible feeling of dread, like I was being watched. And then all of a sudden I was super scared for no reason. I remember feeling this awful fear of looking at the window that was in front of me, although the other window didn't have the same effect. I checked. It was so strange. Then, I got this feeling that someone or something was poking their head through the shelf to look at me. Of course there was nothing there, but it was a powerful sensation. On top of that, I suddenly got the unexpected random mental image of an old lady with very long white hair, wearing a dark robe. I was so spooked that in order to sleep, I had to make a little bundle with the top part of my blankets right under my chin so that they would block my sight from the window, and I rolled just a little to the right so that the shelf was also out of my sight. Then, I put on my earphones and drilled my head with music, not caring about my hearing being damaged or my phone's battery being drained. I concentrated on the music, and after a while I was finally falling asleep, when suddenly I felt something moving next to me on the bed. It was like someone was hitting the bed with their open hands. I snapped my eyes open and turned on the flashlight. And I saw Patty doing exactly that, as if she were trying to put out a fire on the bed. I took off my earphones and asked her what was going on, and she kept repeating, "It was here, it was right here," as she continued striking and looking for something. I asked her again, and she said, the mouse was here, I could hear it rustling. I was kind of relieved when she said that and even pretended to help her look for the damn mouse. But there was nothing. I checked my phone, and it was 4 a.m. After we calmed down, I was ready to go back to sleep, but Patty was too scared and asked if I could stay awake and talk to her. I really wanted to get some rest, but I wasn't going to leave her alone, so I agreed, and we started talking. We shared so many things, so frantically, that we practically became best friends over the course of 2 hours. But during those 2 hours, a lot of weird things happened. First, the girls on top of us started taking in their sleep, all of them randomly saying, "No. Leave me alone." We kind of hushed them, but we didn't know what to do, and we were certainly not going to get up to check on them. Then, when everything was silent again, a bag of chips was sent flying across the room, over the shelf, against the wall, and down to the floor from the girls' bed. I told Patty it must have been one of the girls, although the next morning I checked and on the shelf there were these small ceramic thingies that would have definitely been pushed by the bag of chips and they were all in their place. And all through our bonding time, we were hearing and ignoring this particular noise coming from the wall behind us. It was like someone was dragging a branch on the outside of it, left to right to left. I told Patty it was the wind moving the trees on the hills or maybe an animal. But remember that part of the cabin was inside the hill? That wall was under the ground. Patty was sure relieved with every explanation I managed to pull out of my sleeve, but I was definitely on the verge of a nervous breakdown because I knew none of them were possible. And I had had those terrible feelings before. But, morning finally came after what felt like 3 nights in a row, and we immediately got out of bed and out of the cabin, where, oddly enough, we felt safe. We washed our faces and started wandering around. It was 6 a.m., not even the camp guides were up yet. I was dying to smoke a cigarette, so I asked Patty to come outside of the camp with me, and she totally agreed. She didn't smoke, but she wasn't going to stay behind all alone. We walked and found a good spot on the hill and sat down. I guess we were both trying to make sense of what had happened the night before, but neither of us said anything until Patty decided to break the silence. "None of the explanations you gave me were actually true, were they?" she asked. "Nope, there was something else with us in that cabin last night. I don't know what it was, but I could definitely feel it," I said. Then, I proceeded to tell her what I had felt before she woke up. We decided we weren't going to tell any of the other teachers about this because we didn't want to scare them. When it was finally time for breakfast, we happily walked back into the camp and sat down to get some nice coffee and food. One of the teachers, Arcelia, saw us together and sat at our table. We greet her, and before we could ask her how she was doing, she said, "The weirdest thing happened to me last night." Patty and I exchanged quick glances. Arcelia continued, "I woke up at 2 a.m. after having a terrible nightmare where I was in the cabin and began hearing a scratchy noise. I got up and opened the door, and right there I saw 2 hands. They were wrinkly, like those of a very old woman. There was a knife in one of the hands, and with it, she was kind of like scratching something of her other hand. That something looked like a small bone, and it was bloody. I looked up and saw the face of an old lady with very long white hair wearing a black robe. I'm getting goosebumps right now." But it didn't end there. After waking up all shaken up, Arcelia managed to calm down and went back to sleep. However, she had a second nightmare, this one about her brother being hurt in the middle of the mountains, and she woke up again at 4 a.m. Just like me. Patty and I didn't say anything about our own experience, although we did show her some empathy. Then, a second teacher sat down with us, and Patty and I kind of silently agreed to ask him about his night. He told us that it hadn't been bad except that he woke up twice after feeling his face getting terribly cold. I think you can guess at what times he woke up. What's even weirder is that all of us knew the exact times at which we woke up. After this, I decided it was time to tell them about what had happened to us. I made sure to whisper so that the children around us wouldn't hear me, but the principal, who was sitting on the table next to us, was kind of able to hear me. She very calmly stood up and said, "Oh my God, you guys are making such a big fuss out of it. Those things don't exist, and you better not tell the other teachers that are already on their way to come here." I told her that I had no intention of telling anyone else and that there was nothing to worry about. She said, "I know you're not going to tell anyone, but you should stop reading about those things. You got yourself so scared over nothing. It's just your imagination, you're predisposed to yourself. Look at me. I'm totally fine. The only thing that happened to me was that I had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the stupid cold night. Once at 2 and then again at 4. At this, I almost dropped dead, but I didn't say anything." After breakfast, we packed up our stuff, got on the bus, and we couldn't be happier to leave that damn place. And after 2 hours, we were each in our houses, taking long showers, back to normal. The principal went back to the camp the next week with the last group, and during that time, She had the chance to talk to one of the little boys of the community located near the camp. She asked him if he knew anything about spooky things happening around that area, and sure enough he told her that everyone there knew that there was a witch haunting those mountains. An old lady, with long, white hair, wearing a black robe. I had trouble sleeping after she told me that. A couple of days ago, 2022, the principal called me, offering me a job in the same school again. I agreed, but I told her that I'm not going back to the camp. She laughed and said it wasn't going to be necessary. Thank God.